Do you sometimes wonder how you could truly have an impact when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How do you know you are moving in the right direction when it comes to becoming a more inclusive individual? As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod brings topics such as ethnicity, genders, sexuality, religion on the table. We talk about research and science, but also emotions, feelings, and vulnerability. We discuss allyship, advocacy, privilege, but most importantly, we talk action. Because without action, we stay still. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, stillness is never the answer. Welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. In today's episode, I have the pleasure to welcome Maxine Johnson. Maxine has a long history of leadership roles, both professionally and as an experienced pastor. She's also a wife and mother, and like many other women, she spent a lot of time trying to find the balance between these different parts of her life. Maxine is an author, co-author, certified life coach, and a transformation specialist for women who are ready to take their lives to the next level. She's the CEO and founder of Wife Boss Academy, where she helps women who are in a position of power obtain clarity, confidence, and influence. She's passionate about encouraging and inspiring women to be their best selves. Over the years, she has worked with women globally, helping them find positive change. She understands that the road to living a fulfilled life entails the right amount of motivation and commitment by her audience. She has shared her message to thousands of women worldwide and has enlightened women, helping them realize that they can achieve anything. Maxine loves to share her personal life experiences in the form of heartwarming stories. She has over 19 years experience as a human resources professional and 12 years of faith-based service. She's the author of a life-changing guide titled Helping a Sister: The 5 Critical Components for Creating Global Communities of Change. Welcome, Maxine, and welcome everyone to the latest episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. I am very, very grateful today to have an amazing guest, Maxine Johnson. We'll learn a lot, I think, today. So I'm really looking forward to this episode. Welcome, Maxine.
Thank you, Jillian, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So we'll just jump right in, I think, with my typical question at the beginning of this podcast to get to know you a little bit better. Maxine, what's your story?
Great question. So my story starts out, I'll say I was raised in Philadelphia, born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I came from a middle-class family. Both parents, father worked a blue-collar job and my mom worked as she was into pathology. So had a white-collar job, blue-collar job, my brother and myself. And towards the end of my teenage years, my parents separated and my mom relocated to Maryland, where I had another sister. At that same time, all around that time, I was a teenage mom. I went to college and I took a sabbatical. I won't say I dropped out, but I took a sabbatical and had my son, and I got married at a young age and had 2 sons by the time I was 23. Married for probably about 12 years. And at that time, wanted to go back to school, but just didn't have the means or the support at the time, and got divorced and was a single mom for a while and made up my mind that I'm going back to finish. So I always like to say, when I start, you got to finish. I'm a committed, loyal person. and finished and went back to school to finish my bachelor's degree, where I actually found, I think HR found me. So I was working at a large healthcare institution, or even before that, I worked in a law firm because I thought I was being led to go into law. And that was my initial thought going into college. And then working in a law firm, being a single mom, I realized this isn't what I want to do. And fast forward, I go into a healthcare organization and pursued and completed my bachelor's degree, and HR found me just from interactions with colleagues. And that's when my HR, I guess, career began, and became an HR, what you call a employee relations specialist, or around that, did some training and some development. And also during that course of time, I was going to church and I got called into ministry. So all of this is happening, and ran into an old friend of mine from high school. And this old friend of mine wound up being my husband to this day. And here I am. All of the things that I have learned, and the I'll say the skills and things I've developed over the course of those years. I'm a pastor now. I am an HR leader as well. I'm also involved in a lot of community leadership roles, and I've utilized that to become a coach. So I coach women. That's my niche. I coach women, professional women, as well as I speak. And I also am an author. So all of those things led me to this person today. And there are a lot of stories, Julian, all in between that. So thank you for having me.
I love that story. And there is indeed a lot to unpack here in different directions, especially when we talk about this whole idea of diversity and inclusion and equity. And you talked about divorce, you talked about single mom, young single mom, you talked about the different roles you've had as well, trying to study while you're working, and I was going to say working and raising kids, but that's a job as well. So while having several jobs in parallel, yes, and while bringing different elements as well of your culture and your experience and things that are important to you, that is a beautiful story. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
And so now, I mean, I love the name of your latest venture on the coaching side, which is that Wife Boss Academy. I mean, this is a beautiful name, I think. Tell us more a little bit about that. So what type of people do you work with?
Sure. So the whole thing around Wife Boss Academy is it's an acronym. It's Women, Influence, Focus, and Empower to Lead. And that actually was, that acronym was created after which I found that a lot of women were hesitant to approach me to be coached for coaching. Because women said, I'm not married. Initially, it started by me being a leader, a female leader, and trying to balance that being a female leader and turning that off when I got home, and trying to have that collaboration with my husband, right? And the collaboration going from making all of the decisions or having veto power to coming home and saying to my husband, well, what do you think? Let's do this. How about that? And honoring that he has the veto power. That's our agreement. Whatever works in your home, but that's my husband and I agreement. He has veto power. And so because of that, just trying to turn that off was really challenging. And then I found that a lot of other women who were in leadership roles, we would talk about it, laugh about it. And that's how it started. But after a while, coaching women in leadership roles that were in relationships and marriages or had a partner, it kind of morphed. And that's when it just rebranded itself into Women, Influence, Focus, and Empower to Lead, because we're all leaders in every area of our life, whether it's home, career, and community. We're all leaders. So that's where it came from.
Very true. And so when you were talking about it now, it made me think a little bit about some of the challenges you were describing. And for you, what's the biggest challenge you've encountered in that role as a coach? Actually, no, I should not even say that. Whatever role you want to choose, because there are so many roles there, actually.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I had to face, and I talk about this a lot when I speak, is utilizing the skills that I have in one area and transferring that to every area.
Mm-hmm.
My husband used to say to me, because I'm a pastor, he said, don't take your HR hat off when you go into the church. It's still utilized, because I would always just separate it. And that was a challenge for me. And being challenged in that, the collaboration, being challenged in around a lot of things in the church, those skills were still needed. So I really was challenged by that. I was also challenged in that when you talk about, I always share this story because it totally changed my life going forward. When my youngest son was in college, he called me like 2:00 in the morning. And I tell you, Julian, I was mad. I was mad because he wasn't hurt. He was okay. He's like, no, I'm not hurt. I'm okay. But I want to talk to you because me and my girlfriend just broke up. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? 2:00 in the morning? And what he said to me was, if I was one of your church members or if I was someone on your staff, you would talk to me. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, that really punched me in the gut, but he was absolutely right. And when you talk about learning and diversity of thought, and sometimes we dismiss what our children say, but a lot of things they say can resonate and change our lives. And one thing for him saying that, when I talk about, as we talk about in HR, you talk about empathetic listening, that's something that is thread throughout every area of our life. So yeah, that was a challenge, but I worked through it.
And it's a very interesting point you're making, because here, and especially for this podcast, we're talking, one of the big topics obviously is inclusion. And you're right that we forget sometimes that being inclusive doesn't mean I need to think about the person next to me who is from a different race or ethnicity, or I need to think about the person who is from a different sexual orientation. Right. Of course, they are important. It's part of the people who surround us. But being inclusive is being inclusive at any point in your life. And I probably would have been mad as well if my child was calling me at 2:00 in the morning when I'm trying to sleep, although they might not have succeeded because my phone probably would have been on silent. But it's true that actually, if we really truly want to be inclusive, it has to be done at any point in time. And here, I think, as you said, it's a bit of a punch in the gut when someone tells you your reality right in your face, that you would have behaved differently with someone else. But it's a great way, I think, to grow and to move forward and realize, oh yeah, actually these people are as important in terms of being included.
Exactly.
I love that story.
Yeah, sure. I think a part of that is when you talk about hierarchical or roles and being the mom, like I'm the mom, I'm the parent, what it says goes. And understanding and including our children and those who we might not even think about, like their thoughts and what they have is important. They give us different perspective. So my children aren't in the church, if you will, but I always include them and like to hear their perspectives about world and what they think. And it's totally we don't agree all the time. And it may not even, sometimes I cringe about some of the things that they may say. However, I appreciate it because if they're thinking that, then the people that I serve, there's somebody that might be thinking that. Mm-hmm. So that way I won't be dismissive, but it just more so to open my mind up, to open up to different thoughts, different perspectives, because sometimes we could be so closed-minded. And that's the part of inclusion, because people are willing to come to you and say things to you that they may not say to anyone else. But when we invite them to say, it's okay, and out of respect, of course, it's okay, because it gives us different perspective and it helps us grow, as you share.
No, very true. And for me, it was like one of my learnings on this podcast. I mean, I love it. I'll let you thank your son for this piece of wisdom. Another question I wanted to ask you is, we talked a little bit about the challenges, but I wanted to ask you, what are the favorite things for you about what you do?
Oh, let's see. what I love and what gives me energy and gives me excitement is when I serve my clients, whether it's from an HR leadership perspective, when I serve people in the church, when I serve, and just to get them what they need or as close to what they need. And I see that from as an HR leader, my client base is primarily faculty, those who are in academia, PhDs and EDDs and LMNOPs, and as well as physicians. And one thing that I learned that they have it could be challenging because they want what they want for the most part. They don't have time for all the fluff and the puppy dogs and rainbows and all of that. But I love it that I can serve and get them what they want in a concise way, and that they're getting the results they need. So for example, one of the major surgeons in the organization that I work for, he called me, and everyone's intimidated by this person. Everyone's intimidated. And when he called me, I was intimidated because I'm like, why is he calling me? I don't feel like getting fussed out, cussed out. So I had to prepare myself. But what he said and he asked of me is to help him with something because he heard good things. And when people hear good things about what you do because you get the outcomes, he said, I hear you can fix things. I hear that you can get me what I need. And I said, well, okay, well, thank you for that. What do you need? And he shared with me, and we made it happen. That's something that excites me. Or you can go to an employee who is one disciplinary action away from losing their job, and to encourage them, to inspire them to say, you can do it. If you feel like you can't make it, call me. I'd rather you call me. I'd rather you give it, share your thoughts with me than do anything that will cause you to get terminated. And one of the things that I remember I'll say this kid, because he was young, and he called me and said, can you let me know, Miss Maxine, when was my last discipline? Because it stayed on your record for a year. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, let me look it up. And I did. And I said, oh, it expires tomorrow. And he's like, I did it. I was able to make it for a year with no issues. And I made it. You told me I could, and I made it. Those type of things are the things that excite me, that I love to do. And I have 1,000,001 stories, and I'll be here for a whole nother 2 hours sharing from different. So I just gave you 2.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
And another question I wanted to ask you, actually, because I think it would be interesting for listeners as well, who may be going through that process themselves, or who are supporting other people. So we talked about maybe some of your challenges that you had, but what are some of the challenges that maybe these women in leadership that you're supporting are going through?
Yeah, a lot of the challenges that the women in leadership that are going through is how do they, some are having challenges dealing with conflict. Mm-hmm. And a lot around conflict is a lack of understanding. And that's where that diversity of thought comes in. And that's where learning more about and communicating with those that you're having conflict with. So that's one piece. The other piece that a lot of the women I serve, they're having challenges with what is next for them. Just trying to take in everything and all of these things that I've developed over the course of years, and trying to really understand what's next for me. What's my purpose? Why am I here? Is this the right thing for me? Should I be doing this? Or how can I do this better or do this well? And a lot of times we don't tap into our own selves, and we don't feed ourselves, if you will, so that we can grow. And a part of growth is part of that, including other thoughts, other lessons, and just reaching out and learning from other people.
Mm-hmm. It's thank you for sharing that. And for me, it's interesting because I guess I see it from a different angle. I have 2 young daughters, and I see the world they're going to grow in as young women as well. And I'm thinking actually about what is the world they're going to grow in 5 years, 10 years, and so on. And so I think maybe one question, because I think this podcast is also about kind of bringing some concrete things that we can do. And I want to ask you 2 questions, actually, or 2 parts to the question. What are some of the things that these young women that are going into leadership can do for them to be able to grow and develop? But what is also some of the things that the people around them, like me, can do to support them in that process?
Sure. When we're thinking about young women, we can, if you want to start as a young lady, if we're talking about leadership, it can start as early as encouraging them or taking to say, yes, I would like to be the class president, or being the captain of the cheerleading team, or things of that sort, and supporting them in those arenas and that area. And a lot of what I've learned is my mom, as I said, she, as being in pathology, I was around a lot of physicians growing up, and hanging out. I'll say hanging out, but we would go to some of her colleagues' homes and share things with them and learn from other people, and being able to ask questions. I mean, I think it's different now with different generations, because it felt like we were only allowed to ask certain questions, like, okay, that's enough. But I do, it's like, you're asking too many questions, go play with the kids. But I think it's allowing them to just share and share what their thoughts are, and what they're and putting them in areas where they see other female leaders. So I did see my mom as a leader and what she did. And I was exposed to that. That encouraged and inspired me to say, yeah, I'll be the captain of the cheerleading team, or yes, I'll be the class president. And how we support that is encouraging and inspiring them to do so, or whatever it is, to encourage them to do that. And even though it's females and it's women, even learning from males or whomever, because what I've learned, even though it was my brother and I, but I grew up with a lot of boys, and I came for a love for football. I mean, that's one of my favorite sports, American football. And learning to love that was because I was around a lot of males and learning what they did and watching what they did. And you see that difference. That's a whole nother thing, but you see the difference, how men in leadership are treated different than women in leadership.
Yep.
You see that difference. But what I learned was from football is when I say tough, not being aggressive or whatever, but being assertive and being confident in what you do, because you got it. People are sure enough, your resume, everything speaks for you. They asked of you, that is because they know you can. It's just us realizing that we can and knowing that we can.
And it's a beautiful image you're sharing here with the football, because it is true that there is often a strong bias with words you mentioned, like tough and confident and assertive, that it's something that is associated to men.
Right.
And how do you actually create indeed that, or how do you use that knowledge to be able to be assertive as well, and I think that links back to some of the things you mentioned at the beginning, while remaining true to yourself and who you are, and and all these elements of your own life, from being a mother to being a leader to being a wife to all these other elements, and how do you bring them together and remain true to yourself while being assertive and confident and being able to move forward like that.
Yeah, and I think that comes with time. And I think while you were speaking, it made me think about speaking about football. I remember watching a football game with my dad and my brother, and I said, "Dad, I want to be a referee. I would love to be a referee." And my dad said, "No, you can't. You can't be a referee. They'll call you all kinds of names and all this and that, and then you'll start crying." I'm like, "Oh." And then I just was like, shrugged my shoulders, right? And then I said to my husband, when I see women who are referees, I get so excited. And I say to my husband, "That could have been my job, but my dad crushed all my dreams."
Well, it's never too late. So maybe it's the next step.
It's never too late. But going back to what you're saying, is that truly being true to yourself is, I think that comes from having a community of supporters and reminding you, because of course, when you're growing up, you have ebbs and flows of who am I? Where do I fit? Growing up in the 80s, it was like, is this it for me? You have different areas in your high school and all of that. You're learning and growing yourself, but you also have people in your community, your family, whoever that is, to remind you of just loving on yourself and whatever that looks like. And one thing my grandmother used to say to me was, be yourself or be by yourself, because it's hard to kind of keep up with everybody else and what they're doing. But when you are yourself, it's easy. I am who I am wherever I am. And it's easier. It's easier that way. So that's why I share with people. I can't change who I am because it's hard. It really is hard to keep up.
Very true. Very true. And one thing I wanted to do is maybe dive a little bit more into your book as well, because I think there's some very interesting nuggets in there for our listeners, for myself, for anyone actually who is reading the book. It's called Helping a Sister, the 5 critical components for creating global communities of change, if I'm right.
Yes.
So what is it all about, and how did it come to life as well?
Well, it came to life pretty much. A lot of it talks about my background, but not just talking about my background a little bit that I shared, but it talks about what I've learned through that, because I believe you look at lessons and not losses. And we can dwell on losses and dwell on things that it's like, oh, we went through this. Oh, I went through a divorce. Oh, I went through this. But what are the lessons that you learned from that? And a lot of things I share with those they're the 5 critical components. One of the things I share is about seeing ourselves, seeing others, and seeing things in other people. And as we talk about this topic of diversity and inclusion, the one thing that I learned is I learned something from every woman that has helped me along the way. So I've learned stuff from, I remember there was one part of the book that I talk about a woman who was much younger than I was. She was closer to my oldest son age than she was to me. She could have been my daughter perhaps, but one thing, we got really close, and a lot of things that I had questions about, particularly she was really into health, nutrition, and things of that sort. And sometimes we can turn off and say, well, what can you teach me or whatever? But what I've learned is I've learned so much from this young woman around nutrition, around health, around wellness, around all of that. And so what I've learned through that is that I learned around caring for myself, which is one of the components, from someone of a different generation. And so we talk about the inclusion of generations, being a Generation X, that's me, and learning from someone who was a millennial. I learned so much. Like, we are friends to this day, that we text each other, and I've learned like certain things that I really was just like, I would have never thought or guessed, but I've learned so much. And I talk a little bit about that. I talk about some of the struggles that I've dealt with, and people from social economic backgrounds that sometimes we might look down on them. Whereas one point, as I said, I came from a middle-class family. And going from a middle-class family to being a teenage mom, I found myself being on welfare. And so you learn so much from having this, and I'm not going to put it in different tiers, but you learn from being middle class. And then next thing you know, you're at the welfare office. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? But not knowing that you can learn from that. And when you learn from that, it helps you grow. And that's the biggest part of it. It helps you grow, and it adds to me being the leader that I am today.
I keep loving this story. I mean, it's like when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's like there's all the elements that are there. We talk about gender, you talked about generations as well, and how important it is, and social economic background. And I love how all these things together, you manage to bring them under this message of it is about learning those lessons and what do you do with them, which is very interesting, because this is a topic that is very close to my heart as well, and how being a diverse and inclusive individual makes you more resilient, and vice versa. Being a resilient person helps you become more inclusive. And I think this is one of the criteria, or one of the elements you've mentioned here, that learning from those lessons, learning from how can you bounce back is a great message. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. And I can remember when I was pregnant with my oldest son. Again, I was a teenager, and I took a sabbatical from college. And I remember going to the hospital or they call it the clinic. It was in a low income area in the city. And I remember seeing the doctor, the obstetrician, and he said to me, he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said to him, I don't understand what you're saying. Like, I'm pregnant. This is why I'm here. I need free healthcare. And he's like, you don't belong here. And a side of me was like, okay, I know I'm young or whatever, but he saw potential in me. But what I also saw was the difference in treatment from me and others. And so there were some young women that were there. They may not have had, I grew up, as I said, middle class. So I had exposure to a lot of things. They didn't have exposure. So a lot of times it was like, don't treat anyone else differently. You're right here. You are all you're on the same playing field. The only difference is perhaps in speaking to young women, or a woman she's 19 and this is her third pregnancy, and she dropped out of high school. And I'm like, oh my God, how'd she drop out of high school? But then when I heard we were talking, I understood her story. It's like, she didn't have what I had. She didn't have parents that supported her. She had a parent who was on drugs. And then it was her raising her children by herself. And so then when it makes you understand again, like the resiliency that she had, that perhaps that was inspiring to me. So even though the physician told me I didn't belong there, perhaps I didn't belong there only because my experiences were different from everyone else that you thought I didn't. But actually, I learned so much from these same young women who were in the same situation that I was, that we thought we were in love and we got pregnant at a young age. We weren't married, and here we are. So when you talk about all of that resiliency can be learned too, from no matter who they are and their backgrounds. We can learn from so many different people and their backgrounds, and it does help build you up, your resiliency. And that's a part of making, and I say that's a part of making me a better leader, better woman, and better to serve others.
Thank you for sharing this. And yeah, it's I think for me that's the base of what everything we were sharing here is the base of inclusion. It's, you have to start by, how do you just kind of allow people in your circle, no matter what their experiences are, no matter where they come from. That's the first step. There are many other steps on the way for them to feel included. But when you have someone in front of you who already starts by saying you don't belong here, that's probably not a very good start. And then when you start thinking about, okay, where did they come from? Why are they in that situation? Again, it's like it doesn't allow you to say, I'm including you because, well, simply because you're a human being and we're the same.
Exactly. We have more in common than we have differences. It's just understanding the commonality, even though the differences are most of the time, the differences are some stuff we can't help. I can't help that I'm an African-American woman. I can't help that I was raised. I can't help that happened. But once we get to learn each other and know each other, we have a lot of things in common.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, actually, we're going away. Actually, it's adding another dimension to this whole inclusion here, and it's your role as a pastor. And we've talked a little bit about it before, but I live in Romania, which is a very kind of conservative country when it comes to religion, and especially on elements when we talk about sexual orientation. And I wanted to ask you, actually, what's your view on religion and homosexuality and how it all fits together? Because we hear so much out there. And I think one of the reasons why I want to ask that as well is because I see, especially around me, close people who are struggling, young people, young women, young men who are in this situation where they hide pretty much. They don't come out. If they do, it's very, very hidden in some ways with a very small group of people, because there is that fear about how people are going to react, what they're going to do. And often here, at least in Romania, it comes from the religion. And I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, great question. One thing I always go by, the Bible says to love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the premise of how I live my life. Although I may be a part of a religion that they have their own polity, their rules, laws, and things of that sort. But the Bible is the premise of everything. And so understanding that Bible scripture is is how I serve whomever, whatever their sexual orientation is. So I say that to say, because at one point, so I had my minister of music, he was our musician. And I remember when I got to the church, this is my second church or charge, as they would say, and he wanted to have a meeting with me. He was adamant about having a meeting with me. And I asked, are you okay? He's like, no, I just needed to talk to you. And what he said to me was, he said, I just wanted to let you know, he told me that he was gay, and he hoped that he can still do, and I said, and I told him, I said, that's it. That's all you have. That's what it is. And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, and I gave him a hug. I said, well, thank you. And I hugged him. And he said, and he started crying. He said, you're not, he said, you're not going to douse me with oil. You're not. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I said, but the point is that I love you no matter what. You have gifts and talents like everyone else. The whole thing about it is that we do not include based on whom somebody loves. We don't want to include them. We want to exclude them. Everybody knows what the Bible says, and we can go all up and down the Bible. The point is that when I operate in loving others as myself, that's more important than anything. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's what God honors than me judging and saying, oh, well, you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this. And when they said that we had a really great relationship. And what I said to him, I told him, I said, I kind of figured you were gay. And he said, well, how did you know? I said, all on your Facebook page, I see you with one woman. I see you posted with the guy all the time. So I just kind of assumed, and you just, so we laughed about it. And then there was another story where when I pastored a church in Delaware, there we had a large program, and it was some folks from the state of Delaware that was coming to a church, and it was a part of the arts program, and it was a pretty big deal. And one of the guys who came, it was a historical, I think the church was becoming a historical site. And the person from the state who presented us with our site, I guess the award or whatever, he came with his partner. So he came into the church, and we said, well, are you going to stay to eat? And stay. And you're welcome to stay. He said, well, I don't want to stay. He's like, my wife is in the car. So I'm like, bring your wife in. Well, his wife or partner, he identified his partner as his wife, but it was a male, because full beard, but he had full makeup. Mm-hmm. When I tell you, it stunned people in the church. Like they almost, when I say like old school Black church folk, it was like, oh, I can't believe. I had to pull some people aside and say, nope, we're going to love on his wife as much as we can. Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to do. And what they both said to me was, and particularly his wife, he said, I haven't been in the church in so long. And he said that he was treated with such respect, and he was so grateful for that, and how we loved on him. And he said, we fed him real good. And he was our brother or sister. That's how we looked at it. And that's how we treated him. And one thing, the lesson is that everything's a lesson that was learned we had the congregation, we had a conversation afterwards, was the fact that sometimes people don't see the churches in us, and people will not step foot in the church because of what they think it is. But because churches is in us is how we treat people, mm-hmm. that will share really what God's message is, and it's about loving others. So that's the whole premise of it. So I tell people, they say, oh, I'm gay. I said, okay, okay. Like, I don't go around and say, oh, I'm this or I'm that. I don't have to. It's no big deal. It's loving you for who you are. Mm-hmm. And that's important.
Thank you. And I'm very glad you answered that. I mean, it's something that is very close to my heart in many ways, especially with very close people around me. And it's hard to have sometimes some of these answers and realize that, as you said, you need to you need to kind of what's the word I'm looking for, rely on those people who keep saying we're going to love you no matter what, and these are the ones that are going to help you move forward and make you feel included, make you feel like respected, and all these words you shared with this great example.
Absolutely. And there have been, and one thing that our church did was we had a panel discussion around it, particularly around young people and with young people, because one of the things that people don't understand or will refuse, that some people that are that I know that share their experience that are gay because of things that they went through in the past, and they found love in the same sex. And so for us to say that we're a church and we're including and we love everybody, but to exclude someone who has had hurt in the past that never really healed, but because of who they identified, of who they love today, we shun them, then we're not doing what God has called us to do. So when we understand that, I had one woman, another church in my home church, who she and I became good friends, and she explained to me her entire background and how she was abused and how she went through so much. My heart hurt. And initially when I saw her, because she identifies, when you see her, she identifies as male. She dresses like a male. But the more we talked, the more we got to know each other, it really gave me a sense of compassion and understanding, and to really love on her no matter what. And that's what we came to be. And I've learned so much from her. Name was Linda. I learned so much from Linda, so very much from her, that it really helped me and expand in my thinking and perspective. And so when we talk about religion around the polity of wherever we serve is one thing, because there are rules and things that however you identify, but then at the same time, there are some other things that you really got to get to know the person as well.
No, very true. Thank you so much. I want to ask you one last question, because we're coming to an end. And it's probably more of a bit of a summary of, because you've shared so many amazing nuggets today. But what is one thing you would want to leave our listeners with? What is kind of one word of wisdom or piece of advice that you would want to share with them?
I already shared one of my things I go by, learning from the lesson, not the loss. I also want to share with other listeners is that there's always room for growth and development in all of us. And how we grow and develop is from learning, sharing, and seeing the goodness in everyone. And when we see that, I mean, you have bad people, but there's something good in that you can learn from anyone and everyone. And that's what makes us inclusive. That's what makes us grow. That's what helps us grow. And so even the things that we may not be interested in, and again, we might not be, but even to learn from that, like, tell me a little bit about that. You know, sometimes there's stories like, I don't want to watch that. I don't want to know about that, but I watch it out from a perspective. What am I going to learn from this person that's going to help me grow, that's going to help me develop, and that helps me to be a better leader and a better servant to others?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so if people want to reach out to you, I'm sure we could, as you said, we could spend probably another couple of hours talking about stories and many other things. And I hope I'll have the pleasure to welcome you again in another episode. But in the meantime, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. You can go to my website at www.maxineLjohnson.com, and you can go there. That has all of my information there. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Maxine L. Johnson.
Amazing. I'll put all the details anyway in the notes, but thanks for sharing that as well. Maxine, thank you so much for being part of today's episode. I loved it. I think I'm gonna. It's well, by the time we release the episode, it will not be Friday night anymore for me. But I have 2 days now for the weekend to reflect on all these things that you've shared, because it was really amazing to have you. So thanks again for being part of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod.
My pleasure. It was such an honor to be here, and I don't take for granted to be invited to your platform. Thank you so much, Julian. It was my honor.
And thanks again.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.